You are great, yes, you are holy one. Walked upon the sea, raised the dead, reign in majesty, mighty God. Everything written about you is great. You are great, yes, you are holy one. Walked upon the sea, raised the dead. You reign in majesty, mighty God. Everything written about you is great. You are great. You are great. You are great. Oh yeah. Say you are great. Say you are great. Everything, yeah. You are great. You are great. Oh, you are great. You are. Oh, yeah, yeah. Say you are great. You are. Worship you today. Great everything. What you do today? Give him all the praise. Yeah. Mighty God. What you do today? Give you all the praise. As we lift our hands to you, we place our in the heart. Raise our voice to say, everything about you is great. It's shiny. Worship you today. Give you all the praise. As we lift our hands to you, we place our in the heart. Raise our voice to say, everything about you is great. What a mighty God we serve. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Everything, yeah. What a mighty God we serve. You walked upon the sea. Oh, hallelujah. Everything, yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. You are great. You are great. You are great. You are great. You are. You are great. Strong and mighty God. I say you are great. You are. Say you are great. Oh, everything, yeah. Oh, yeah. Raise the voices. Raise the voices. Yeah, 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 yeah. Say you are great. Oh, you are great. Oh, yeah, yeah. What's the plan? great. We worship you, Lord, King of kings and Lord of lords. Oh, so great you are, doing marvelous things. Everything about you. Yeah. I love you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. I love you. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Lord, you're merciful. You are take all the glory, take all the
You are once again welcome to Evangelist Inimakalu, Treasury of Excellent Knowledge. I am your servant, Evangelist Inimakalu, and I greet you on my personal behalf. As usual, I greet you on the behalf of the Lord, the owner, the creator of the whole universe, the Messiah and the Savior of the whole universe, Jesus the Christ, God himself who came in form of Jesus Christ, appearing to us as a fellow human being, God among humans. That is the meaning of Emmanuel. God came to stay with human beings for the purpose of salvation. To his name be all the glory. And I say to you special good evening from my base. The time from here is 6:31 p.m. Today being Monday, the 27th of this month of June 2022. And as I speak, I am live and direct on Evangelist Inimakalu, Treasury of Excellent Knowledge, via YouTube and Facebook. So if you are hearing my voice and you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, do subscribe to my YouTube channel, because this is the beginning of building this wonderful channel. And I have begun the work of extracting my previous teachings, which I have in Inima Biafra, Treasury of Excellent Knowledge. I have begun to extract precisely my Christian teachings, which few people had listened to. And as a result of the circumstances at hand, I was using that one channel for both for Christian teachings and Biafra education. But now I have separated the Biafra education from Christian teaching channel. So this Evangelist Inimakalu, a treasury of excellent knowledge, from where you are watching me right now, is precisely for Christian programs. So this is precisely for Christian program. Starting from last week, I have begun to upload my previous teachings, which I do extract from Inima Biafra Treasury of Excellent Knowledge, and I have had a lot of them. So do subscribe to my YouTube channel. When at your own convenience, you begin to listen to those videos. It is very, very important so that you will develop in Christian knowledge, because I am not just doing this thing for nothing. I have my ambition, and the utmost ambition is to train people who will know what I know concerning the Bible, concerning Christianity, concerning religions and the world affairs, to train people who will be like me and those who will be better than me. That is the essence, the ambition. So you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also subscribe to my Facebook channel, whichever you are more convenient with. The both YouTube and Facebook, they are in progress now. I mean my YouTube and my Facebook. But this particular program now is also being streamed live via Inima Biafra, Treasury of Excellent Knowledge, and the YouTube of it. So I am on three destinations now. Evangelist Inima YouTube, and the Facebook. Then Inyima Biafra, YouTube. These are the three destinations I am streaming live from now. And by the grace of God, as time goes on, I will go for more destinations on the Christian teachings. So may you be highly blessed as you have come. So this is the part 15. The topic is part 15 of Christianity versus religions and the political colonization in Africa. Then the component that makes up the emphasis of this part 15. One, the Berlin Conference 1884. The Berlin Conference 1884. Second, dominant British and French colonization in Africa. Then three, feudalism in the Old Testament. Four, 13 most powerful African kings. 13 most powerful African kings. You know, in this component of this part 15 of this video, we are going to see different things from these subheadings. First of all, the Berlin Conference 1884. This is to analyze the video containing the Berlin Conference 1884. The Berlin Conference is a conference the European nations held. The colonial European nation gathered together to hold in 1884. And that is over 200 years ago. And the reason for that conference was for the European giants to discuss among themselves on how they should collectively and in collaboration colonize Africa, to talk about how they should share Africa based on the countries, which territory each of the countries should control, and what will be their interest, so that they will not begin to fight among themselves when they invade Africa for colonization. And the plan is that we the Africans will be the victims while they keep on exploiting us. But it was about to settle among themselves on how they should amicably invade Africa and take whatever they want without fighting among themselves, because they know that if they do not have an agreement when they go to Africa, rather than grabbing whatever they want accordingly, they will begin to fight over the wealth, the natural resources, and the human resources with which God has immensely blessed the African continent. Then in the video, we will see how everything happened. Then I will have my own analysis concerning that video. Through the analysis, I will begin to point out some things that our people may not easily understand, then bringing them to real understanding with proper explanation. Then at times, I will be giving illustrations as usual with secular affairs. And for some issues, I will go with Bible references. So beside the Berlin Conference, then the dominance of the British and French colonization, how they dominated Africa, and the role they play to ensure that Africa remains in perpetual slavery. Then I will play the videos. These things that they have their various videos, I will be playing their videos. Then feudalism in the Old Testament. I have made videos on feudalism. Feudalism is Feudalism. Feudalism. I spell it again. Feudalism. Feudalism. Feudalism is that is invasion system of governance, mafia system of governance, imposition system of governance. This is an absolute tyranny and in the guise of benefiting the people through governance, while the governance is just orchestrated to exploit the people. Feudalism, a systematic government where even the leaders, the government, the warrant chief, the warrant kings, and the politicians will, all of them will be slaves to the feudal masters, locally and internationally. That is what feudalism is all about. But I have not made video about feudalism on biblical aspects, but I have had up to 7 videos regarding feudalism via Biafra agitation, and they are uploaded in Inima Biafra TV Treasury of Excellent Knowledge. Then I will play the video containing the 13 most powerful African kings. So I will be analyzing on these videos to tell us how the contribution of the Westerners to colonizing Africa, and the contribution of we the Africans to sustaining that colonization. Then we'll talk about, I will hint on the role of Christianity and the religion of which is, to be precise, on Islam, then Christianity, then talking about colonial Christianity. I will also talk about the real Christianity, which is Christocentricity. So I know this channel has not been known by people, but I have seen one person who had visited. I don't know whom you are, but your presence is highly recognized. So as you have visited, you recommend this channel, Evangelist Inima Carlo channel, to others, so that people will begin to know what is happening here, and the people will begin to subscribe to come and be acquiring excellent knowledge. So without speaking further, I will just move on with the program. Then as I speak, I will start by playing the first video, which is about the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference 1884. So that's the video, and I will begin to play it and be analyzing it. It is about 18 minutes video.
For 14 weeks and 5 days, between November 15, 1884 and February 26, 1885, European countries prepared and cooked their plans on how to share Africa like a piece of cake. They called it the Berlin Conference. It was at this conference in Berlin, present-day Germany, that African lands were divided on a map, while the Africans themselves were exempted from the meeting. It was not an omission of invitation or a simple oversight. Rather, it was a large-scale legalized daylight robbery. Africans were considered irrelevant and incapable of making meaningful decisions on what happened to or on their lands. Since they were uncivilized, according to these European invaders, they needed help, and the participants of the Berlin Conference were to be their saviors. Towns, lands, and rivers were all portrayed on the map that hung on the wall. With just a ruler and pencil, borders were formed, territories were claimed, and trade routes were created or removed, while historical background, cultural laws, sovereignty, and traditional institutions of a people dating back thousands of years were completely ignored. And just like a piece of cake, Africa, the second largest continent in the world, was shared at a conference table.
If you really want to lose weight, there's an ancient tropical hack that people who go to bed after 8 p.m. have been using to burn
it at a conference table. The Berlin Conference was organized by Otto von Bismarck, the first chancellor of the new German Empire, who was concerned with securing portions of the continent within which exploration had begun. The conference.
So, the Berlin Conference was orchestrated by the Europeans, and with ruler and pencil with papers, they drew the map, the African map. They rationalized the Africa among themselves, who will control which territory. And the Africans, our ancestors, we are not consulted for this conference. The Berlin Conference, the Berlin we are talking about is the capital of Germany today. Berlin, the capital of Germany today. That is where the conference held. So the European giants came together to have that meeting. Then on a table, like a cake, they demonstrated they share the African continent, which was the second largest continent in the world. They shared it, and believing that our ancestors should not participate in the meeting because their opinions were not needed, even up to today, that the opinions of the Africans are not needed, and the Africans considered to be irrelevant. Then what makes the situation like this? First of all, we'll first ask ourselves, why was Africans irrelevant according to the Westerners? We are going to see some of the reasons which I'm going to point out now. One, there was overwhelming ignorance in Africa. Even until today, there is still overwhelming ignorance in Africa. Africans are not well equipped psychologically, intellectually, educationally, and otherwise. There is poor development in Africa. So the same thing we are experiencing today is what our ancestors underwent. We have lots of natural potential, both human and land natural potentials, but we do not have the knowledge to develop them. So we had our fathers, the majority, I know that there was civilization, but the civilization that could not protect their territory, and the invaders succeeded to invading the African continent to control our fathers, our ancestors, means that the civilization was poor compared to that of the Westerners. And that is not to say that the Westerners were right on what they had done. No, they were absolutely wrong because it is not their territory and they shouldn't have invaded it. And it is out of their greediness and selfishness and their wickedness that have caused them to do so. But it is our responsibility to protect what we have. And like our ancestors, like we today, even until today, we have not risen up. The majority of Africans have not risen up for us to protect what we have, to protect our legacy, to protect our territory, to protect our interests, to protect our life, to protect our health, to protect our natural resources, to protect our industrialization, to protect the food we eat and the food we should not eat. There is no protection. There is absolute insecurity in Africa. And most Africans are yet to realize that we are still under the same colonization. So, for Africans to be relevant in the world, we should not wait for the Westerners or the Asians to ascribe relevance to us. It is our responsibility to make ourselves relevant. And we cannot become relevant until we begin to develop ourselves. It is what we will do that will make the people to accord that respect. And by what we do under compulsion, what we decide this is what we must do to develop ourselves. We make the decision, we agree among ourselves. So there are other factors like disunity, selfishness that contributes from the side of the Africans for that colonization, which is still in existence and progressive today. That colonization that have been over 100 years, or even 1884 until now, 1994, 2004. In 1984, 1984, then 2004, over 120 years and still counting, almost 140 years as regarding the entirety of Africa. This is the secret, part of the secret, because of the weaknesses of the Africans and the influence, powerful influence of the Europeans. So let's keep listening.
Birthed the General Act of the Berlin Conference, which had been nicknamed the Scramble for Africa. The conference consisted of top European nations who were invested in exploring the resources that abound within the continent. This was justified under the guise of civilizing or developing the countries which they considered barbarian and primitive. This paved the way for the colonization of the African states by the Western countries and eventually robbed the continent of its rich cultural heritage and linguistic diversity. By the time most of these countries would gain independence from their colonial masters during the 20th century, great damage had already been done. The structures and systems that had been laid down by the colonizing nations made inadequate provision for self-sufficiency and thus had a great dependency on their colonizers for survival. So, how did the Berlin Conference come to be, and what impact did it have on Africa as a whole? There was a general belief by the Europeans that Africa belonged to no one in particular and had to be claimed and developed. When the Berlin Conference took place, no African individual or leader was present. Ironically, Africa had experienced a great deal of development before the Europeans. By the 13th century, different empires within Africa had attained global prominence, drawing the attention and curiosity of the Western world. Some stories about the level of wealth contained within the continent seemed too good to be true, but with the discovery of the Congo River Basin in 1874 by Henry Morton Stanley, there was certainty about Africa and its rich resources. One of the leaders who was very interested in these discoveries was King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold had previously formed the International African Society, which had a mission of civilizing Africa. He teamed up with Stanley and eventually created the International Congo Society. This was similar to the former society but had more goals added to be achieved by the society. But Leopold was far from being a sincere man. He was a strategic and cunning leader who wanted to advance his personal wealth with Africa's resources. He began sending explorers who doubled as his representatives in laying claims over a wide expanse of land at the center of the continent. In the course of his civilization agenda for Africa, he secretly bought off investors in the International Congo Society. Stanley went to the area to try to establish the Congo Free State. This was while other European nations were also in the scramble for Congo. France, on discovering Leopold's hidden agenda, sent their own explorer, Pierre Savognin de Brazza, who created Brazzaville and mounted the French flag, while Portugal laid claims as well on the Congo area, which they backed by treaties signed with leaders of the ancient Congo Kingdom.
It doesn't matter who you are. Having rational, biological understanding of the human condition will completely transform your life into the most wonderful existence imaginable.
Other European countries began taking interest in a continent of gold they had heard rumors about, and this resulted in competition and great conflict between these nations that were claiming different regions of Africa. Great Britain and France were both having conflicts over West Africa, Portugal in Egypt, and Britain in East Africa. Leopold and the French also had conflicts in Central Africa over the Congo area. The German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, whose country was considered an imperial power, also picked up interest in laying claims to African lands. He sought to resolve these conflicts by calling for the Berlin Conference. Bismarck felt these conflicts arose because there was no equal distribution of access to the economic advantage Africa provided, and called for the conference to resolve these irregularities. This proves that the purpose of the Berlin Conference was largely economical and not for developing the African states. Countries such as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Belgium, Denmark, France, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, and the Ottoman Empire were represented at the conference. The conference began on November 15, 1884, and went on for 14 weeks and 5 days, ending on February 26 of 1885. In the Berlin Conference, territories claimed by European countries were to be legalized, formalized, and then drawn on the map to avoid further conflict. Trade routes were also agreed upon amidst colonies, and a framework for colonizing territories was created. Explorers were to be sent out to explore the African lands. Then they would proceed to offer protection to the indigenous people of that land by signing treaties with them. Finally, the European explorers or ambassadors would return to their home country with the treaty signed. Then, the government of that country would inform or negotiate with other European countries so that their claim over the African territory would be recognized and uncontested. In all of these establishments, Africans were not included or...
The signing of the treaty is about feudalism. The signing of the treaty is about feudalism. They'll sign the treaty, and the treaty is all about signing the loyalty and compliance of the indigenous people through their leaders. What the Westerners did was to colonize the African leaders, surrender them. The African leaders were being caged. They were ruling, but ruling under surrender to the Westerners, and that is what had continued until today. Then the African leaders became their colonial stooges, their feudal stooges. That is, it is a game of the mafias. These colonists were mafias, and I will categorically tell you that none of the colonists was a born-again Christian, because that is not in any way a kind of a life of any Christian. So I will come to that. It is all about feudalism. So when we are telling people about feudalism and about the influence, the colonial influence, the colonial power on top of Africa, many people are yet to believe us. That is the reason I do what I do, to be bringing more evidences to keep substantiating what I have been teaching, what I have been saying, and to continue to refute the controversy of the people against this factual teaching. So the African leaders have no power of their own. The African leaders, what they do is they manage the exploitation for the Europeans. Now it has extended beyond the Europeans to the Asians, also to the Americans. They manage the exploitation, which is colonialism, in favor of the Britons against the indigenous people. The indigenous people pay loyalty to their leader, to the African leaders, while African leaders pay loyalty to the to the foreign colonists. You are going to hear more about it in this particular video.
Considered, although it was their land that was being divided, they were regarded as incapable of ruling themselves. It would also be interesting to note that most of the time, the indigenous rulers did not even understand what the treaty was about or what they were signing. In some scenarios, these treaties were signed by makeshift leaders who did not exactly have the authority to do so. However, one African leader saw through the tricks of the Europeans. Menelik, an important leader in Ethiopia who would eventually become emperor, wrote a letter to the participants of the conference clearly stating that Ethiopia would not be needing their protection. Although his letter was ignored, Ethiopia and Liberia were the only African states that were not colonized in the scramble. The Sultan of Zanzibar begged to be present at the conference, but to no avail. Little did he know that he was to be part of the main topic of discussion. The General Act was the outcome of the Berlin Conference, and it made provisions for different trade routes and the framework for colonization. It addressed different issues bordering on the colonial.
So, I've had it. The real people who should have the authority to decide for Africans, I mean the real leaders, we are not consulted. What the colonies did was to go and curry favor with subordinates and the non-leaders who became obedient, who became selfishly and foolishly and blindly obedient to the Westerners. Then the Westerners chose them and make them the leaders and impose them on the people. And these are the people who they used to consult. And anyone who stands in opposition to that will be eliminated. That is what they were doing. Though that information is not contained in this video, but these are the things that happened during the colonial era. They will boycott the real leaders, the real chiefs, the real traditional leaders, because during those days we do not have political leaders. It is the colonists that brought politics into Africa. So we never practice this kind of academic and this secular world stage politics. No, leadership was hereditary and it was royal. It was royal in different dimensions, and it belonged to some specific lineage of people. But what matters is that how did the leaders lead? Did they manage the affair of the people well? That is what matters. And you hear the commentator say that they believed and they concluded, I mean the colonists, they believed and they concluded on their own that the Africans are incapable of ruling themselves. So they needed help. This is how they come. They come in the guise of helping Africa. So this thing did not start today. It has begun over 100 years ago. So they always come in the guise of trying to help Africa, while the real motive for their coming is invading Africa, exploiting Africa, and killing and destroying those who stand in opposition to their invasion. So that is the truth of the whole matter. So we are going to hear furthermore what she has to say.
Organization of the African states. It confirmed the Congo Free State as the private property of King Leopold II, and also confirmed the free trade proposal by making the Niger and Congo rivers free for ship traffic. The General Act also included the signing of the International Prohibition of the Slave Trade. More importantly, it established the principle of effectivity, which stated that powers could only possess colonies if they actually possessed them. This also meant that any country which wanted possession of any territory in Africa would notify other signatory powers for formalization and recognition. The Berlin Conference was a glaring disregard for Africans. The Europeans saw their views, opinions, and ownership over their lands as irrelevant. 14 countries were duly represented at the conference, and at its conclusion, 8 out of the 14 countries started possessing different parts of the African regions. The 6 other participants, such as Austria-Hungary, Russia, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and the United States, did not take any formal possession of any part of Africa. However, by the end of the 19th century, all African states except Ethiopia and Liberia had been colonized by the Europeans. After the Berlin Conference ended in 1885, it led to the creation of African countries by forcefully merging different ethnic groups, cultures, languages, and people. This, of course, overrode the existing groupings, boundaries, and regions within the continent. The conference legalized what was not legal and created a ground for cooperation between the European countries on taking over the African states. The European countries claimed to offer protection to the countries they overtook. The 1884 and 1885 Berlin Conference would not only be the birthplace of colonization, but also the conflicts within and without countries, state, and ethnic groups that still exist to this day. The robbery did not only end with land and territories, but also cultural artifacts, treasures, and resources yet to be regained by the continent. It was obvious that the Europeans were wolves in sheep's clothing, fueled by the desire for acquiring Africa's natural resources for the betterment of their countries. As such, there was a need to secure their portions to maintain their industrial sector, which was just starting to grow. To achieve this, they had to secure African territories that would readily provide them with the resources they needed and a market for the goods they produced. A total of 50 countries were carved out of the scramble for Africa. Great Britain took control of Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Nigeria, and Ghana. France took a better part of Western Africa, from Mauritania to Chad, and also Gabon and the Republic of Congo. Belgium and King Leopold II controlled the Democratic Republic of Congo, while Portugal took Mozambique in the east and Angola in the west. Italy got hold of Somalia, then known as Italian Somaliland, and a portion of Ethiopia later on. Germany took Cameroon, Namibia, and Tanzania, while Spain got the smallest territory, which was Equatorial Guinea, the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa. The Berlin Conference, which lasted for over 3 months, still evaded serious problems and questions that were left unanswered. Many of the representatives had not stepped foot on African soil and somehow assumed they could understand and manage the complexities of the African states. The sovereignty of the African states was not recognized, yet treaties were needed to be signed to legalize the relationship between both parties. This in itself was contradictory to the claims of the European states. Although the General Act seemed to prohibit the slave trade, it is on record that over 10 million Africans in the Congo area died under Leopold's leadership due to starvation, diseases, and war. The act was used to gain approval and legitimacy in the public eye by the European countries, but did not in any way alleviate the sufferings and conditions of the locals under their colonial masters. The locals were brutalized and used to further his selfish interest. The concept of free trade was unrealistic as many of the colonizing countries would not readily allow free trade within countries they had invested heavily in colonizing. For instance, the Congo was operated as a monopoly under Leopold's rule. The conference, which tried to curb the scramble for Africa, further enhanced it. It was presented as a means of creating a platform for peaceful claiming of African states by European states, but it also had its hidden agenda. Germany and Britain were interested in Africa to promote their ambitions and retain their position as the #1 global power over the others, and not for peaceful colonization as assumed. The Berlin Conference holds entirely different consequences for the continents involved. For Europe, it was just a failed enterprise, while in Africa, it created long-lasting damage that is still visible to this day. Some of the damages done by colonization have been said to be too large to be repaired. Even after gaining independence, most of these colonized African countries are still ill-equipped to be well run by themselves. Greed and corruption are the order of the day, and conflict still exists within the African borders. Some African diplomats have called for redrawing the African map and redefining the boundaries laid by the colonial masters. But there are also fears that this might aggravate an already politically tense climate. These fears have created another group of the opinion that the colonial boundaries be respected. Nevertheless, this does not suffice for the damages that run deeper in the cracks within the continent. It has been 137 years since the Berlin Conference ended, and one can only help but wonder if Africa would ever recover from the effects of the European invasion and plunder.
So those people who were being shown lastly were not Christian missionaries. Rather, some of them were military, army, police, security apparatus of different categories, while the rest who were on suit, they were political agencies, politicians, colonial politicians. Then the religious aspect of it has not really emerged, but it will emerge through this video and another one which I will play later. So they came politically, they came with their military, they came with their police, they came with threat, but under the guise of trying to help Africa, but it was all about their selfish interests. And as we have heard, war of superiority was going on in their mind. Who will be the top colonizers over the rest? And that was the intention of the Germany and the Britain. So the only share Africa has was to surrender to the colonists, and the same surrender had continued since ever then until today. And it is now we are talking about liberating ourselves. And how serious, how committed are we with the movement for self-liberation, liberating ourselves from this colonial power, from the colonial influence? How serious are we? But if we do not actually understand the root causes of this colonization and the system it works, we can never fight the system back to releasing ourselves. So these are the importance of making these videos. Some people will listen, some people will watch and observe and have a rethink and begin to engage into actions. So there are many other things to talk about when they are the time for each of them reaches.
We always have more stories like this to talk about. So do not hesitate to like and share this video with your friends. You can subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to receive the latest videos as they drop. Also, if you would like to know more about the difference between French and British colonialism in Africa, do check out our next video.
Hey, ¿qué tal? Soy Sergio Cánovas y tengo un mensaje que darte. Quiero decirte dónde va a ser el evento Tu Riqueza Eres.
That's the next video. The difference between
the current political order in most African countries is usually attributed to the legacies of colonialism. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, and Italy were the major European powers that were involved in the complete colonization of Africa. However, the two nations that held the most colonies in Africa were France and Britain. The difference between French and British colonialism in Africa is the focus of this video. Before colonization, Africa had wider flexibility of movement as national borders were almost non-existent. There was no structural form of government as large communities led to the formation of kingdoms, powerful empires, and city-states. This led to the formation of common languages, beliefs, traditions, cultures, value systems, art, lifestyle, and religious practices. However, a global European process of reaching all the continents of the world led to the colonization of Africa, and this process changed the world dramatically. European countries fought to take over African countries mainly because of their natural resources. Their reasons range from economic, political, and religious. At the time, the European continent was faced with economic depression and countries were losing money. Apart from being out of harm's way, Africa had an abundance of raw materials. Another reason for Africa's colonization was the
just look at these people, see their appearance. Warriors. They are all warriors. Real colonists, not actually Christian missionaries. But a lot of them came to disguise themselves as Christian missionaries because that gave them a pathway also to penetrate our people. When they began to find it difficult, they began to use psychology, identifying what our people love so much. Then they will begin to each thing we love, our people love so much, they will adulterate the same thing and use it to penetrate our people, making our people believe that we are friends and they are friendly to us, that all of us can work together based on what our people believe. Why am I saying this? These people, a lot of them pretend, they disguise themselves as Christian missionaries. They adulterated Christianity, bringing it to the Africans and most especially to the Biafran land of Africa because they came and observed that our people like worshiping system. We are committed, our people were committed to religions. Then they came up with the adulterated and the colonial Christianity. Then, and that is alongside the Christocentricity, which is the real Christianity. They were colonizing people, and the real Christian missionary were also preaching the real gospel. But however, the colonists prevailed with their counterfeit Christianity, as because they had the weapon, they had the military, they had everything, and they were on the mission of stealing, killing, and destroying because they were under satanic influence. They were under satanic influence. They were not godly. Even until today, the colonists are not godly and they are satanists. So this is what I want us to understand. Just look at these photos and identify the kind of people in the photo. They are all warriors, militaries of different categories, military and police, and you see that appearing in their dressing.
Need to use the African population, which served as cheap labor for European industries. The scramble for Africa, which was the phrase used to describe how European countries sought to take over countries in Africa, began during the new imperialism between 1881 and 1914. In 1884, at the request of Portugal, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, at the Conference of Berlin and British New Imperialism, called for an end to the confusion over the control of Africa. They met to discuss the division of Africa without Africa being present. They shared Africa like a piece of cake. The countries represented at the conference included Germany, Belgium, Italy, Great Britain, Russia, Spain, Austria-Hungary, the Netherlands, Denmark, France, Portugal, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the United States of America. Great Britain, France, Portugal, and Germany were the major players out of the 14 countries at the conference. They were controlling most of Africa at the time. The conference lasted for 3 months, and it saw the European countries bargaining over geometric boundaries, and this led to the division of the continent of Africa into 50 irregular countries. The rivalry between Britain and France also saw them fighting over the acquisition of Africa's territories. By 1900, the majority of Africa had been colonized by 7 European powers: Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. These powers established colonial state systems which were authoritarian and bureaucratic, and were the machinery of administrative domination to facilitate effective control and exploitation of the colonized societies. However, these European countries were successful in colonizing Africa rapidly, mainly because of the rivalries between African leaders. Kings and chiefs were competing with themselves over who was the wealthiest and most powerful, and the Europeans took advantage of this by luring some leaders to their sides to join forces with them to fight their rivals. Also, the sophisticated weapons which the Europeans possessed and the Africans lacked made the continent vulnerable to their domination. They took control of colonies using force and violence. Some natural disasters equally played a large part.
I want to talk about the two-direction forces against Africa. Africans were fighting among themselves. Then the European colonists took advantage of that. They took advantage of that. They invested their divide and rule and the divide and conquer. They took side with some of the African kings to fight the rest of the kings. Then after fighting and defeating the other king, they themselves would turn with their own more powerful weapons to conquer those kings who fought alongside with them. Then all of the powerful kings will be defeated. Then the Europeans will begin to establish the African kings based on stooges, whosoever that pay allegiance to the Europeans will be imposed on the indigenous people as their king. That was the beginning of the warrant chief, the warrant king, the warrant Ezes, and the rest of the warrant leaders. And even until today, our politicians are now warrant politicians. We have nothing on our own. Our politicians do not decide. It is not the African politicians that decide what happened in Africa. Rather, it is the Europeans and the Americans, the Westerners, that decide what happens in Africa. And the politicians, the traditional rulers, even now, the majority of the religious leaders are loyal to them. They are loyal to them, as we are going to see. But before I will continue with this video, I have paused this video. Before I will continue with it, I want to play another video. And the video I want to play, the other video I want to play is a video of it's a top 13 most powerful kings in African history. That is to show us the evidence of what
Africa
the commentator
has an amazingly rich and complex.
The evidence of what the commentator has said. Actually, the Africans, we are fighting among themselves. The kings, we are fighting kingdom against kingdom, kings against king. So they never focused. And the same thing is the problem we are suffering until today. We Africans are still fighting ourselves while the colonialists help us to fight ourselves. After killing ourselves, they come to control us. That has been continuous. So what I'm just pointing out here is that we have our own weaknesses that give the colonists advantage over us. And they cool down to watch and to observe our weaknesses as people, as Africans. Then they will invest their selfishness. They will supply us weapons to fight and kill ourselves. This is what things that have been happening. But why not we say no to that? Why not we reorganize among ourselves and decide on how we should live on our own to develop ourselves and doing this peacefully? I know that we may need them in some ways or in many ways, but it should be on agreement based on we rule ourselves. Then this is where we need the help, the assistance of the Westerners, and that should be on negotiation. We supply them with our natural resources while they give us their technology, they give us the education, the proper education. The price will be beaten. It is not the price that will be imposed by the Westerners. We Africans should evaluate our resources, evaluate our human potentials, then we transact with them. What they will do for us, we pay them. What we will do for them, they pay us, and pay us appropriately, and they should no longer have influence over our government, over our resources management. It should be the indigenous Africans managing our resources. That is the proper way it should be. But I want to play the video so that you will see for yourself evidentially that the Africans, we are busy fighting among themselves, while the Europeans, we are watching and observing and taking sides. They became the referees to Africans and began to blow partiality, blowing in favor of wherever they believe they will get more favor until they conquered the whole Africa. So this is the video. I will play the video, then you listen to it. The 13 most powerful kings in African history.
And there have been hundreds of important kings, queens, sultans, chiefs, and emperors throughout the millennia. Unfortunately, not all of them are as well known to us as they should be. From great warrior kings to important political reformers, there are so many great stories and things to learn from them. Largely overshadowed by our modern-day presidents and prime ministers and heads of states, in no particular order, here are 13 of the most powerful kings in ancient Africa. Sunni Ali, also known as Sunni Ali Ber, was the first king of the Songhai Empire and the 15th ruler of the Sunni dynasty. Under Sunni Ali's infantry and cavalry, many cities were captured and then fortified, such as Timbuktu in 1468 and Jenne in 1475. He conducted a repressive policy against the scholars of Timbuktu, especially those of the Sankore region who were associated with the Tuareg whom Ali expelled to gain control of the town. During his reign, Songhai surpassed the height of the Mali Empire, engulfing areas under the Mali Empire and the Ghana Empire before it. Sunni Ali ruled over both urban Muslims and rural non-Muslims at a time when the traditional coexistence of different beliefs was being challenged. His adherence to African animism, while also professing Islam, leads some writers to describe him as an outwardly or nominally Muslim. There are two versions of Ali's death. According to the Tariq al-Sudan, Ali drowned while crossing the Niger River in late 1492. However, other sources say he was killed by his sister's son, Askia Mohammed Toure. Ali was succeeded by his son, Sunni Baru, who was challenged by Askia because Baru was not seen as a faithful Muslim, and Askia successfully succeeded to the throne. Askia Mohammed I, who was born Muhammad Toure in Futa Toro, was an emperor, military commander, and political reformer of the Songhai Empire in the late 15th century. Askia the Great was from the Soninke ethnic group. At its peak under his reign, the Songhai Empire encompassed the Hausa states as far as Kano in present-day northern Nigeria and much of the territory that had belonged to the Songhai Empire in the west. His policies resulted in a rapid expansion of trade with Europe and Asia, the creation of many schools, and the establishment of Islam as an integral part of the empire. Askia subsequently orchestrated a program of expansion and consolidation, which extended the empire from Tagaza in the north to the borders of Yatenga in the south, and from Air in the northeast to Futa Jalon in Guinea. Instead of organizing the empire along Islamic lines, he tempered and improved on the traditional model by instituting a system of bureaucratic government unparalleled in Western Africa. In addition, Askia established standardized trade measures and regulations, initiated the policing of trade routes, and also established an organized tax system. He was overthrown by his son Askia Musa in 1528. He died 10 years after in 1538 and was buried in Gao, present-day Mali, under a pyramid of earth scaled by wooden spikes. His tomb is still standing and has become one of the most respected mosques in all of West Africa. Shaka Kasenzaga Kuna was born into the small South African clan of the Zulus in 1787. His father was the chief of the Zulus, and his mother, Nandi, was the daughter of the chief of a nearby clan. When Shaka was still a young boy, his father drove him and his mother out of the village and soon became part of a clan of a powerful chief named Diginzuayo, where Shaka trained as a warrior. When Diginzuayo died, Shaka took control of the surrounding tribes and became the most powerful leader in the area. He continued to train and build his army, conquering many of the surrounding chiefdoms. At one point, Shaka had a well-trained army of around 40,000 soldiers. He was a strong but brutal leader. Anyone who disobeyed an order was immediately killed. He sometimes massacred a whole village in order to send a message. When Nandi, Shaka's mother, died, he was heartbroken. He forced the entire kingdom to mourn her. He issued an order that no new crops were to be planted for a year. He also demanded that no milk be used for a year and that all pregnant women would be killed. He had around 7,000 people executed for not mourning enough for his mother. The people had had enough of Shaka's cruelty and were ready to revolt. In 1828, Shaka was assassinated and buried in an unmarked grave. Undoubtedly the greatest monarch of the Central African state of the Kanem-Borno dynasty, Idris.
So, do you just design anything from what he has said and the mentality of the then young king whose mother died, who was brutal, who was just eliminating people at the disobedient to any order he gave, whether the order was beneficial or not, it doesn't matter. That is tyranny. And at the death of his mother, he decided to vent economic sabotage in his kingdom by saying no milk will be used. Those who have the milk matter, the milk business, they should not run their business. They should suffer economic sabotage for 1 year. Then the pregnant women will be killed. All of the pregnant pregnant women in his kingdom will be killed. Tens of thousands of people were killed. And we hear that he can eliminate an entire community only to pass a message. That is the way Africans we live, very tyrannical. And this is what we are seeing, still repeating in different dimensions. Modification of the cruelty, self-hate, and the self-destruction going on in Africa. This is the mentality of the Africans which had continued, and the Westerners still take advantage of it. They want us to be fighting while they come to take advantage of it in the guise of trying to settle our problems. They will worsen the matter, and Africans keep fighting themselves while the Westerners are busy exploiting our natural resources. And the fight of Africa is against Africa and for economic sabotage of the Africans, for selfish reason and the domination over fellow Africans. That is how far the Africans can see, how far visionaries, African leaders are. Except even the few who will have a conflicting ideology in the positive ways are still slaves to the colonial masters. So how can we actually be free when all these things are still going on among ourselves? We are complaining about the colonial masters. What about the ones we are doing among ourselves? The ones we do among ourselves, they are even worse than the ones the colonial masters do for us. Because when the colonial masters have nobody to use anymore in Africa, then we render them powerless. Their strongholds are we the Africans. Like here in Europe, where I reside, you know, even no African will dare try to manipulate the Europeans again to their own detriment and in the favor of we the African. No, I don't think it will happen until this world ends. But why shouldn't we make the difference of we not permitting ourselves to foreign invaders to keep on manipulating us? That is the foundation of the African colonization. Our personal weaknesses of which the colonies take advantage of to keep exploiting us. So this is the point I want to hit regarding what I've already played in the video. Then I will continue the video right away. I will continue the video right away and we'll keep listening to it.
Aluma was May or king of the Kanem Borno Empire, which was located mainly in present-day Chad and Nigeria. An outstanding statesman, Kanem Borno reached the zenith of his power under his rule. Aluma is remembered for his military skills, administrative reform, and Islamic piety. His major adversaries were the Hausa to the west, the Tuareg and Tubo to the north, and the Bulala to the east. Kanem Borno under Aluma was powerful and wealthy. Government revenue came from tributes, taxes, and trade. After the fall of Shanghai in 1591, Idris Aluma became the undisputed champion of the Muslims of the city. The empire then became the Borno Caliphate and the leading Islamic power in Africa. The capital city was called Ngazagamu, and it was one of the largest cities on earth. In 1658, Ngazagamu housed about 250,000 people. There were 660 avenues. Many of them were broad and unbending, indicative of town planning. The architecture of the high streets lined on both sides with trees offering shade. Such buildings had to be built on an unprecedented scale, and the workmanship was of the same quality as seen in Europe at the time. Aluma ruled from 1564 to 1596 according to the Diwan. He died in the Bagrami campaign where he was mortally wounded. Later, he was buried in the Lake Alu, south of the Maiduguri, present-day northern Nigeria. Born in 1844 in Abome, Benazin Osubowile was the 11th king of Dahomey from 1889 to 1894. Dahomey was one of the most powerful kingdoms of West Africa, deriving its power from trade and its superior army. At the time, Benazin masterfully led an army of 15,000 men and 5,000 Amazon women. In February 1890, the French occupied Cotonou. Benazin, now king after his father's sudden death, prepared for war. His forces attacked the French simultaneously on two fronts, militarily at Cotonou and economically by destroying the palm plantations at Porto Novo. However, France was determined to annex Dahomey before the British or Germans did. Béhanzin, knowing that he would have to defend his sovereignty, continued upgrading his army in preparation for renewed war. He declared a treaty made by his father in 1868 null and void. From this, war began. In 1894, Béhanzin was defeated by Colonel Alfred Amedi Dodds, a Senegalese mulatto who was sent to fight against him with powerful French armed forces. Béhanzin, not wanting his people to be massacred, surrendered his person to Dodds without signing any instrument of national surrender or treaty. Dahomey was then placed under France's protection and it became a French colony. In 1906, Béhanzin died while on exile in Algeria. Menelik II was the emperor of Ethiopia from 1889 to his death in 1913. At the height of his internal power and external prestige, the process of territorial expansion and creation of the modern empire state was completed by 1898. Menelik is also remembered for leading Ethiopian troops against the Kingdom of Italy in the First Italo-Ethiopian War, where Menelik scored a decisive victory at the Battle of Adwa. Ethiopia was transformed under Emperor Menelik, the major signpost of modernization with the help of key ministerial advisors were put in place. Externally, Menelik's victory over the Italian invaders earned him a great fame. Following the Battle of Adwa, recognition of Ethiopia's independence by external powers was expressed in terms of diplomatic representation at his courts and delineation of Ethiopia's boundaries with the adjacent colonies. Menelik expanded his kingdom to the south and east into Kaffa, Sidama, Wuleta, and other kingdoms. Later in his reign, Menelik established the first cabinet of ministers to help in the administration of the empire, appointing trusted and widely respected nobles and retainers to the first ministries. These ministers would remain in place long after his death, serving in their post through the brief reign of Liege Iyasu and into the reign of Empress Soditu. In the 17th year of his reign, that is 1324, Mansa Musa I of Mali set out on his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. It was this pilgrimage that awakened the world to the stupendous wealth of Mali. Cairo and Mecca received this royal personage, traveling from his capital of Niani on the upper Niger River to Walata, present-day Mauritania, and on to Tuat, now in Algeria, before making his way to Cairo. Mansa Musa was accompanied by an impressive caravan consisting of 60,000 men, including a personal retinue of 12,000 slaves, all clad in brocade and Persian silk. The emperor himself rode on horseback and was directly preceded by 500 slaves, each carrying a gold-adorned staff. In addition, Mansa Musa had a baggage train of 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold. The historian Al-Umari, who visited Cairo 12 years after the emperor's visit, found the inhabitants of this city with a population estimated at 1 million still singing the praises of Mansa Musa. So lavish was the emperor in his spending that he flooded the Cairo market with gold, thereby causing such a decline in its value that the market some 12 years later had still not fully recovered. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu grew to be a very important commercial city, having caravan connections with Egypt and with all other important trade centers in North Africa. Mansa Musa not only expanded Mali's borders from the Atlantic to Nigeria, but also built a vast trade network from gold and salt and undertook various building projects, truly making Timbuktu the center of West Africa, if not the world at the time. Tunka was the Ghana, that is ruler of the Ouagadougou, from 1037 to 1075. He was described in contemporary accounts as a lover of justice, and he settled many disputes within his empire personally. He became known for his involvement in communities and for the fact he greatly boosted the economy of the empire. He was able to further cultivate his public image through projecting an air of magic and mysticism. During his reign, Mane controlled numerous warriors that were tasked with defending the kingdom. Later on in his reign, the kingdom would eventually fall because of a few factors. One factor was the system of governance and the division between Muslims and non-Muslims. Mani himself was not a Muslim. He had succeeded Basi in 1062 and like him had refused to convert to Islam. The missionary Almoravids who wanted to convert other people to their faith started invading the empire under Abu Bakr ibn Umar. However, in 1076, the Almoravids succeeded in sacking the empire's capital of Kumbe, Saleh. Mani continued to rule as a vassal of the Almoravids and paid tribute to them. The Almoravids were expelled in 1087, with Abu Bakr being killed. The empire had, however, been severely weakened, and the territories formerly ruled by it had become independent. Islam, which had become the dominant faith of its upper class, was being imposed on all subjects, and many animists who migrated to other areas away from the empire. Sultan Ibrahim Unjoya ruled over Bamum and its inhabitants in western Cameroon in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. His dynasty went back centuries, but his rule was delayed, first because of his age, and second because he had to recover the head of his father from an adversarial clan, which was of great cultural significance to the Bamum. He created the first written scripts for the Bamum language and established schools. In 1902, German colonizers arrived in the Bamum Kingdom. The entire region had been claimed by Germany in the European partition of Africa in 1884. Resistance by neighboring peoples had proven futile, so Sultan Njoya opted for a tactical surrender, warmly welcoming the German occupiers. This strategy allowed the Sultan to maintain a high degree of autonomy in his administration of the state. He ceded military authority to the Germans, but was able to continue his ambitious cultural projects without interruption, while also seeking to modernize and reform his kingdom. The Sultan also welcomed Protestant Christian missionaries from the Basel Mission, who established a base in Fumban in 1906. Njoya encouraged his nobles to enter their children in Christian schools, while still maintaining his own Bamum schools. Muhammad Ahmad ibn as-Sa'id Abd Allah was a Muslim religious leader and a Sufi teacher in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. He declared a jihad.
Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, colonized by the English, by the Britain. Then there is one point I want to hit here, and that is, according to the previous kings whose photo was just who has just passed from the video, he has the intention to developing his territory. Likewise, the rest of the African kings as at then, even until now. The leaders have the intention to develop our territory, but the colonial power can never allow them. Then infight can never allow them. So the colonists are there to consistently hold us ransom by distracting us. And we Africans, we subscribe into that idea and system by allowing ourselves to always be fighting among ourselves, to be interrupting each other. And this is how they continue to invade us stage by stage. We are going to hear more about the Christian missionaries, the establishment of some Christian schools, and this Christian school, they have two kinds: the real Christian school for proper Christian education, whereby the colonists also disguise themselves like Christian and they form their own colonial Christian education. So it is all about adulterating whatever our people have picked so much interest upon and use it against our people. So their own Christianity became a colonial Christianity, while the real Christianity was still in existence. And as we have had this commentator, while the Cameroonians, as at then, we are being educated in the Christian education, they have their own traditionally academic education. but the colonists will find a way to eliminate their traditional academic education because they have ulterior motive. That is how everything had went wrong. But our generations, what are we doing? Are we actually doing the needful to change the system, or are we worsening the matter by fighting among ourselves unnecessarily, and by so doing we keep on supporting the consistent colonization? Then the worst part of it is that barely all of the African leaders were selfish. Until today, barely all of the African leaders are selfish. That is the reason we cannot end the infight among ourselves, because as far as those people ruling or leading us are selfish, they will keep promoting and projecting and protecting their selfish interests. So the infight is founded on selfish interest. So until we Africans begin to have leaders without selfish interests, that will be the beginning of African progress. But as long as we are still being ruled by selfish people, there will be no progress, because the selfish people do not protect the interests of the populace. Rather, they always protect their personal interests, and as a result, the neglected, the oppressed, when they begin to fight back, and some other rival leaders will begin to stand in opposition to such selfish leaders. Selfishness and the greediness had been the two fundamental factors for the fight between African leaders, and it leads to betrayal. It leads to betrayal because when some people are desperate to protecting their selfish interests, they begin to conspire with the oppressors, I mean the colonists, against their fellow Africans, which the Europeans can never do in favor of any African at all.
And raised an army after declaring himself the Mahdi, a messianic figure in Islamic thought, in 1881, and led a successful war of liberation from the Ottoman Egyptian military occupation. He also achieved a remarkable victory over the British, who were the de facto rulers of Egypt. Briefly, he led an independent Islamic state but soon died of typhus after the 1885 liberation of Khartoum, where he defeated the British general Charles George Gordon, who was killed in the battle. This made the British reprisal inevitable, and the state Ahmad founded fell to the British in 1899. Ahmad was an inspirational figure for many Muslims who also wanted to assert their right to self-determination against imperial and colonial powers. The experiment at Islamic governance was both short-lived and a failure. Ahmad tried to discourage feelings of tribal superiority to replace tribalism with a common Muslim identity that crossed tribal barriers. Ahmad's legacy lives on in Sudan's political and religious history, and his tomb can still be visited. Former Prime Minister Sadiq Al-Mahdi and Sudanese British actor Alexander Sadiq are both his descendants. Iwuari I was the king of the Benin Kingdom for the latter half of the 15th century. His rise to power was a violent and bloody one, and the result of a vicious coup against his own brother, which destroyed much of the capital of Benin. Despite the violent start to his reign, Iwuari earned his title of the Great by rebuilding much of Benin City, reforming political structures, becoming a patron of the arts, and expanding the territory of the kingdom. He increased and expanded trade with other nations, which helped him to foster the arts, and it is due to him that ivory and wood carving became more popular. Iwuari was an indisputably real historical figure, but he was such a powerful man that many believed he held magical powers, which is attested to in much of the artwork of the era. Alaafin Abiodun Adegolu was an 18th century king of the Oyo people in present-day Nigeria, coming to the throne shortly after the Oyo conquest of neighboring Dahomey. Abiodun soon found himself embroiled in a civil war over the goals of the newly wealthy states. Basharon Gaa, the empire's prime minister and Lord Marshal, had used his power to pervert the constitutional terms of abdication in a bid to limit the powers of the Alaafin and gain more political power for himself. During Gaa's power play, he had succeeded in deposing 4 previous kings. In terms of trade, while Abiodun favored economic expansion for the sake of the Oyo Empire, his opponents favored using the wealth from Dahome's tributes to finance further military expansion. Abiodun soon proved victorious and pursued a policy of peaceful trade with the European merchants of the coast. This course significantly weakened the army, leaving his successor Aole to face a number of local rebellions. Abiodun's reign is generally remembered as a time of peace and prosperity for the Oyo Empire. His descendant Alaafin Atiba was the founder of the ruling dynasty in the present Oyo. His grandson, Candido da Fonseca Gavao, under the title of Dom Oba II, was an important South American abolitionist during Pedro II of Brazil's rule. His other descendants include the 19th century Ibadan warrior Oluyole, the historian Reverend Samuel Johnson, the first African bishop of the Anglican Church, Samuel Ajayi Crowther, as well as Abat Olayinka Macaulay, the founder of Nigeria's first political party. In 1809, Usman Danfodio founded the Sokoto Caliphate. Danfodio, a religious author, writer, and Islamic activist, was one of the urbanized ethnic Fulani communities living in the Hausa state in what is now northern Nigeria. An instructor at the Maliki School of Law and the Kadiriya Order of Sufism, he remained in the city-state of Gober until 1802, when, inspired by his reformist ideas and growing persecution by local authorities, he led his followers into exile. Danfodio wrote more than 100 books on religion, administration, culture, and community. He blamed the current African Muslim rulers for what he saw as corruption, paganism, or breach of the principles of Sharia law and heavy taxation. He promoted literacy and education, particularly for women, and many of his daughters became scholars and authors. His works and sayings are still very much quoted today. Usman Danfodio retired after 1811 and continued to write about the moral actions of the Muslim faith. Upon his death in 1817, Muhammad Bello, his son, succeeded him as Sultan and became the ruler of the Sokoto Caliphate, which at the time was the largest state south of the Sahara. Are there other African kings whose stories you would like to tell us? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't hesitate to like and share it with your friends. Would you like to know more about other powerful African queens? Check that out in the next video. You can also subscribe to our channel to receive the latest videos as they drop.
So we had him made mention of Herbert Macaulay, Bishop Ajayi Crowther, and the third person who formed the first Nigerian political party. It is the party they had formed since ever then, and we will see the participation of a priest Ajayi Crowther, a priest Ajayi Crowther, a Christian missionary, indigenous Christian missionary, then involving in the formation of the first Nigerian political party. Since ever then, Nigeria has been going backward until today. That is to tell you that the colonists, they invaded us in all round. Even the Ajayi Crowther, who had a good conscience, was still loyal to the colonial system. As far as anything called politics goes, it still continues in Nigeria. That is the way everything will continue. It is never meant to benefit the indigenous people. It is always for the advantage of the colonists. So until we have what should be called referendum where the people will decide on themselves on how they will rule themselves and where to belong, and there should be no foreign influence in such referendum, because if there is any foreign influence, the foreign influence will always come with the colonial influence. Even after having the referendum, they still have the people being loyal to them. So this is about tracing the foundation, the foundational causes of the colonization going on in Africa, from the religious aspect, from the political aspect. We see the approach of the Uthman Danfodio mission, the approach and the beginning of the settling of the Fulanis and other related Arab people in Africa and advancing to Nigeria. Until today, they are coming in their millions. So I want to continue with the French, the difference between French and British colonialism in Africa. That is the video I was playing before this. Then after that, I will read a record about feudalism in the Old Testament. That should be the last batch of this program.
To their sides to join forces with them to fight their rivals. Also, the sophisticated weapons which the Europeans possessed and the Africans lacked made the continent vulnerable to their domination. They took control of colonies using force and violence. Some natural disasters equally played a large part in the rapid colonization of Africa. Drought in 1895 led to a food shortage, which caused the death of both man and animals and also weakened the population. There was also a plague of locusts, which destroyed the few crops that were grown. Cattle plague also broke out, leading to the death of cattle, sheep, and goats. All these incidents worked against the African continent and made them prey for the Europeans. The British and French colonized more than 95% of the African continent. While Britain colonized 22 African states, France colonized 20. France retained control of the northern, western, and parts of the Central Africa, while Britain had control of Eastern and Southern Africa. The entry of the Europeans into Africa led to the spread of their culture, religion, and most especially language. Today, most African countries use either French or English as their major or second language. The French had been in Africa as early as the 1600s, but this changed during the Industrial Revolution, when European countries had a need for raw materials and manpower, thereby seeing Africa as their go-to. After the Berlin Conference in 1884, where an agreement was made concerning the colonization of Africa, France colonized West Africa between 1890 and 1914. The French established its first African colony in 1830 after seizing Algeria. Some other African countries colonized by France include Senegal, Gambia, Chad, Mali, Benin Republic, Sudan, Gabon, Tunisia, Niger, Republic of Congo, Cameroon, and Côte d'Ivoire. France colonized more countries in West Africa compared to other parts of Africa. All its colonies were constituted into a loose federation with its headquarters in Dakar, the present-day capital of Senegal. The system of administration adopted was known as the policy of assimilation, whose aim was to assimilate and transform all Africans in their colonies into Frenchmen and women. In other words, it was the imposition of the French culture, language, religion, law, traditions, lifestyle, and art on the West African culture. Due to the failure of the policy of assimilation, mainly because of widespread criticism, France abolished the policy and introduced the policy of association. The policy of association respected the African people's culture and their political institutions were recognized. For a long time, Britain was only interested in having a few outposts in West Africa for the slave trade business. However, British abolitionists succeeded in outlawing the slave trade in 1807. It wasn't until the latter part of the 19th century that Britain's interest in colonizing Africa was aroused, and the scramble for Africa led the British to aggressively expand and defend their colonies. The Berlin Conference carved up Africa, and the British got the southern and northeastern parts of the continent, thus leading Britain to spread its tentacles across the continent of Africa. It included lands in North Africa, much of West Africa, and a whole lot of territories in Eastern and Southern Africa. Some African countries colonized by Britain include South Africa, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda. One notable Briton who justified the colonization of Africa was David Livingstone. He was an explorer who went around much of Africa's interior. Livingstone reported back home that Britain had a duty to introduce the 3 C's, that is, Christianity, commerce, and civilization, to Africa. It was thought that Christianity would provide the moral principles that would guide Africans, while commerce and civilization would encourage them to produce their own goods. Therefore, it is no secret that British rule had a significant impact on the lives and economy of Africans. Ruling in Egypt, the main interest of the British was to have control of the trade route starting from Egypt to the Red Sea all the way to India. The Egyptians were receptive to the British and even sent their children to school in Britain. Britain, in return, did not interfere with their Islamic beliefs and even assisted in building more mosques. Meanwhile, in West Africa, the British were more heavily involved with the leaders of these nations, allowing them to rule their people any way they deemed fit, but they still paid their taxes to Britain. They adopted the British language, dressing, lifestyle, and religion, were educated in Britain, and took up positions in the civil service. However, in South Africa, a different scenario played out. There was a mixture of the British Boers, who were descendants of Dutch settlers from the 1600s, and native Africans such as the Xhosa, the Zulu, and the Matabele. The Boers disliked the British rule because they saw the native Africans as inferior to them and treated them as slaves. Tensions between them eventually led to the Boer War from 1899 to 1902, which ended
the war of superiority, the feeling of superiority, the concept of the high-bred and of the low-bred. The Britain and the rest of the Western are regarding themselves to be the people of the high-bred, while the Africans are the people of the low-bred. And as a reason, we begin today, we hear what is called a first world, second world, and the third world countries. So this is about concept of superiority, which is part of the colonization. Then talking about the change, alteration of religions and the investing of the colonial religions, British religions. Now we differentiate between British religion to Christianity, then British Christianity to the real Christianity, which is the Christocentricity. As many Africans misunderstand and they propagate, they say that the Christianity is a white man's religion, but that is not true. And some say that it is brought to us from England. That is not true. What they brought was not actually Christianity, rather they adulterated their religion, their colonial the colonial religion, disguising it to be Christianity because Christianity was rampant and was excelling, was predominant as at then, was predominant both in the Europe, and was advancing to all over the world, as we can now know today that there had been a time when Christianity was dominant. Even until today, Christianity is still dominant. But this end of the time we are in, things are changing when people have begun to lose their proper Christian faith. So the point I am making here is that they came with the adulterated Christianity, which became a colonial Christianity, and the real Christianity began from Israel, from heaven, landed in Israel as authored by Jesus Christ, being exported to the rest of the world as it is still being exported to the rest of the world. As I am here now, I'm talking about it. I don't know who will watch this video later, and I have seen a few people who have just connected with me to listen to this particular video, and they're from different parts of the world. So that is how it goes. Christianity, the real Christianity, is actually meant for moral principle, to develop the people morally, because when people are morally developed, they think rightly, then they behave rightly. It is there they can manage things very rightly. There they lay the foundation of progress and the prosperity. So that is the stance of Christianity, and it is the will of God that we should live peacefully and prosperously, progressively and successfully in this. That is the will of God, and that can only be achieved when all of us practice not colonial Christianity, but the real Christianity, the real Christianity, the Christianity of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ never colonized anybody. Rather, he was busy and is still busy building the good morality among humanity. So those people who brought those Christianity were not actually real Christians. Rather, they were part of this. They were part of these colonists who disguised themselves in form of Christians to keep on deceiving our people and to continue their colonization. That is what had played out. That is what had played out, and we are now making the correction. And by the grace of God, I am a Christian evangelist. That is the reason I am making these videos, so that the wise will be listening from my channel to know the truth and observe the truth for themselves and apply the truth for them to get the proper result, and to equip our people so that they will not continue to be falling victim of religious deceptions and colonial deceptions in the guise of Christianity. So that is my work. That is the essence of Evangelist Inima Treasury of Excellent Knowledge. May God bless you as we keep listening to that video.
With a British victory and peace terms were drawn. Thus, with these variations, it is difficult to make a conclusive judgment about British rule in Africa. Their arrival on the African continent definitely disrupted the traditional African culture and traditions and widened the gap between the people and their chiefs. But it also brought about a change in the economy of the countries, development in terms of infrastructure, education and enlightenment, and medical solutions that were otherwise unknown. It also saw the end and abolishment of some archaic cultures and traditions that were in times past done out of ignorance. For example, the killing of twins. Compared to other European invaders, the British were tolerant of the religious beliefs and practices of the people. They're also aggressive and intentional in their fights to end the slave trade. Now, let's take a look at the difference between the French and British colonialism.
Yes, the British fought to end the slave trade in some aspects, but they move ahead to modify the same slave trade in their own pattern. So it is all about hijacking the slave trade. It is not all about ending it for real, but removing the slave trade from the hand of the Africans while they manage the same slave trade for their own favor and to the detriment of we the Africans. So that is what had played out. Then, yes, there are minute of them who ended the slavery for real, but those minute were the genuine Christians among them. After ending it, then the colonists continued their colonization. They ended it, but Africans were not completely liberated. That is exactly what happened. So we don't want half liberation, we want total liberation.
There are so many dissimilarities between the administration of the French and that of the British. While Britain practiced the indirect rule system of government, France adopted a direct rule system of government. The indirect rule system of government utilizes the traditional political institutions of the people to govern them, which gives each colony the opportunity to administer their area as long as the indigenous leaders agree to do whatever the colonial masters ordered. On the contrary, a direct rule system of government is when central authority dominates and takes direct control over the rule and administration of a territory that had been largely self-governing. Thus, the British respected traditional rulers while France was in contempt for local languages, traditions, and culture.
The world is in chaos. We absolutely, desperately need understanding of our deeply troubled human condition.
Indirect rule was the brainchild of the British colonial administrator, Frederick Lord Lugard, and was the main system used by the British in overseeing their colonies compared to other systems of government they had in operation. They used African leaders to work on their behalf and imposed obedience on their fellow Africans. Lugard first experimented with the indirect rule in northern Nigeria, which worked with the emirs and the Sokoto Caliphate in charge, but this rule failed in the southern part of Nigeria. In the north, where indirect rule systems seemingly worked, the Fulani emirs were autocratic and corrupt, which led to riots from non-Fulanis and non-Muslim protesting their misrule. In his book, The Dual Mandate in British Colonial Africa, Lugard theorized the system of administration that he established in northern Nigeria, where he preserved the judiciary, administrative, and religious structure of the Sokoto Caliphate. Also, while France federated her colonies in West Africa, Britain did not. France operated a federal system where all the territories in West Africa were administered as a whole from the center in Dakar, while the British allowed each territory to operate as a separate entity, and governors had room to act based on what the situation demanded. Britain permitted the function of political associations and allowed the development of parliaments and assemblies, while France withstood the formation of such. Britain did not practice the assimilation policies of the French, and as such, did not attempt to make English persons out of the Africans. French officials were also frequently transferred from one station to another to prevent them from planting their influence there, while the British allowed their officials to stay for a long time at a place and familiarize themselves with the people and their customs. As a matter of fact, it was incumbent on any British administrator to be fluent in the local language of his domain. Another major difference between the British and French rule in Africa is education. Education was mainly undertaken by religious missionaries and partly financed by public funding in British colonies, but the French were more attuned to public schools in their colonies. Mission schools, which had more African teachers teaching in their local languages, were more efficient at educating a large number of children, and primary school enrollment was on the high side in British colonies. Cooperation between the missionaries and the colonial government cannot be undermined, as this played a huge role in the success of academic pursuit. One other aspect of opposition between British and the French rule concerned civil liberties. Restriction of civil liberties was harsher on
the direct and the indirect rules they are talking about is all about feudalism, which I've been saying. So I want to just highlight on it before we go forward.
French side than on the British. In terms of forced labor, French colonies took the form of both labor tax and the use of military conscription for public works. Labor tax required Africans to work for a specified number of days every year on local public work projects, while military conscripts were used for longer periods of time on larger scale projects. The British, on the other hand, abandoned forced labor in their colonies by ratifying the 1930 International Labour Office Forced Labor Convention. In terms of hierarchical administrative structure, under the French, there was a colonial master based in France who had a subordinate, Governor General, based in Dakar. This was followed by a lieutenant governor located in each of the territories, and the territories were divided into cercles, which were headed by a commandant du cercle. The next in rank were the African chiefs. This was also similar to the British hierarchy, having a Secretary of State for the colonies in London appointed by the British Crown. Next is the governor stationed in the colony, and under the governor were the regional and district commissioners and then the local chiefs. British law differed from colony to colony, but the French had unifying laws across their colonies. Colonialism can be said to be a direct form of imperialism, but it is often said that all colonialism is imperialism, but not all imperialism is colonialism. How far has colonialism been said to have impacted Africa? Or should the question be, how much has Africa allowed colonialism to affect it as a continent in all ramifications? One major impact of colonialism on the African continent is that it brought about underdevelopment in different ways. Despite the fact that colonialism brought education, enlightenment, and some form of civilization, it is partially responsible for Africa's underdevelopment. Not being rooted in African culture, colonial education was essentially literary and had no organic linkage to the African environment. There was no technological base and was therefore in opposition to real or industrial development. Colonial education set out to train clerks, artisans, and interpreters who would serve them in their exploitation of the continent's rich resources, and was not aimed at industrialization or technological development. The introduction of colonial education made Africans abandon their arts and crafts, which were sculpting, cloth weaving, carving, and mining, but instead settle for just reading and writing. Colonialism also distorted the African pattern of economic growth and development. There was disarticulation in the provision of social amenities, transportation, production of goods, and pattern of urbanization. Africans were not allowed to go into manufacturing, but rather relegated to exporting raw materials and importing finished products. Even food is being imported
into Africa from Europe and other parts of the world. That is the colonization, so that they will be the manufacturers, the Westerners, the colonizers will be the manufacturers. They keep creating job opportunities for their own people because the industry will be in their own countries. And at the same time, they will decide the cost of the goods, and they deceive Africans to forfeit their own industrialization as exemplified by the sculpting, weaving, and the other sorts of industrialization, which should be which was the economic hub of the Africans even before the discovery of other natural resources. Because in those days, the natural resources most rampantly was gold in Africa, but the crude oil were not yet discovered in many places, like in the Biafra land and some other part of the territory that is now colonized and given the name Nigeria. So it is about we coming back to our senses, reflecting on what had happened, we now taking advantage of the previous mistakes to correct our present mistakes, and the failure to do that will will linger more and more, this colonization. Then we begin to think, what is the right thing we should do? Why must we wait until foreigners to come and tell us what to do and what not to do? And it is now confirmed when I have been shouting about colonial education. You have seen it that it is real. The colonial education is about giving our people the theoretical part of education, while they seize the practical part of education for themselves, the vocational and the practical aspect of it. They give us the opportunity to read, to study theoretically, but there is no opportunity to produce in anything in the field of our study. So that is the colonial education. They hijack the productivity and give us the theory only to make us subservient, so to make us subservient, to subordinate us. So that is to make us subordinate, to place us in the position of subordinate, and the lowest subordination regarding whatever they are doing. They only produce clerk, those who can read and write and speak Queen English, only to be interpreting for them and to be serving them as their secretaries and the rest of them, and nothing beyond that. Then wearing very nice suits and claiming we have arrived when we are yet to begin the journey. So it is about orientating our people, coming back, recalling, and coming back to our proper senses. Because without proper senses, we cannot actually do the proper things. The understanding, according to the Bible, it is understanding. Understanding is the foundation of success and prosperity. This understanding is all about developing the right concept of the things we should be doing, and also against the things we should not be doing, and we continue to engage into action. Being visionaries, we set our goals, we target it, we know the cost, and we'll be ready to avoid every distraction, and there should be no foreign influence. We should decide, rather we transact with the foreigners. That is how it goes properly. But they don't want that for us, because it will give us the proper advantage we deserve. Because I'm not talking that we should go and rob them. It is all about we reorganizing ourselves to get back to our proper ways of life. It is not the diabolical one. I'm talking about industrialization, that is industrial revolution, and liberating ourselves from colonial powers, colonial influences locally and internationally.
Which has led to food shortage and escalation in the prices of foods that can be otherwise grown locally. Road networks are not left out. The colonial masters focused on building rail tracks and roads that would facilitate their export of raw materials found in Africa, and were not interested in building a transport network to link rural areas, which would bring about economic growth and development. Another problem colonialism caused was the concentration in only a particular area. Most of the social amenities provided were focused on major cities, and minor towns and villages were ignored. The urbanization pattern was disjointed. This led to rapid rural-urban migration, overcrowding in major cities, poor hygienic conditions of living, a rise in social vices, and tribal and ethnic conflicts. In conclusion, colonialism brought devastating consequences to Africa that the continent is yet to recover from. It came to ensure that the African continent would always be dependent on their European colonial masters and will not be self-sufficient. It is indeed a sad story.
So it is all about programming. We Africans are being programmed without we realizing it.
We always have more stories like this to talk about. So don't hesitate to like and share this video with your friends. You can subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to receive the latest videos as they drop. Also, if you would like to know more about the top 3 factors that led to the underdevelopment of Africa, do check out our next video.
Okay, so the video had come to an end. Now to round the program up, I will engage into the last batch of the content of this program. The last batch should be on reading. The last batch should be on reading. So due to the small narrow writing of the content, I will read it from here. I'll read the content from here. It is overbright from here. I'll read the content from here because it is, the letters are tiny. The letters are tiny. If I place it there, it won't appear very well. So I will read it. I'll read it from here. It is the 4th and the last batch of the program, which is colonization. Colonization in the Old Testament. Sorry, feudalism in the Old Testament. Yes, feudalism is the method. Then feudalism and colonization, but I'm speaking about feudalism, which I have defined. That is rulership, ruling the people with violence, with technical violence, manipulative and network violence, the building of stooges, and imposing people as imposing himself as feudal masters, then imposing leaders, stooge leaders, vassal leaders upon the people, only to exploit the people and keep eliminating those who stand in opposition to the feudal lords, using their own people, using their own imposed leaders. So I want to read a story which will contain, I want to read a story will contain some portion of the Bible and with secular informations. Then I begin to read. Then the topic is Zedekiah, king of Judah. Zedekiah was one of the Israelite king, and from the Judah side of Israel after the partition of the Israel kingdom under the reign of Rehoboam, Solomon's son. Then a time came when Israel was invaded by the Babylonians, and most of the Israelites were taken to captive by the Babylonians under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar as at then. Then I begin to read. This is via Google. I got it via Google. I googled it, Zedekiah, so that to contain other social information. Saying Zedekiah original name Mataniah flourished 6th century BC, king of Judah, 597 to 587 to 586 to 586 BC, whose reign ended in the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of most Jews to Babylon. Mattaniah was the son of Josiah and the uncle of Joachim, the reigning king of Judah. In 597 BC, the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar besieged and captured Jerusalem. They deported Joachim to Babylonian and made Mattaniah regent, regent. This regent means a vassal king, a stooge king, a loyal king to the colonists. Regent under the name Zedekiah. Zedekiah thus held his throne as a vassal under an oath of allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar, but under local pressure, he began to intrigue against the latter in concert with the neighboring states of Moab, Edom, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon. He actually tried to liberate himself and his people from that Nebuchadnezzar tyranny and feudalism. Then let us read on. In the 19th year of Zedekiah's rule, a Babylonian army laid siege to Jerusalem after he had conspired to revolt against the Babylonians with Egypt's help. During the siege, the prophet Jeremiah, KV, in brackets, urged peasant submission to the dominion of the Babylonians, which he regarded as the will of God. But royal officials and Jewish nobles denounced him, and he was accused of desertion and imprisoned. So even the Israelis, we are not interested in that will of God, even if the genuine prophet had prophesied it. So this is a contributing factor to fall into captivity and remaining in captivity, ignoring the will of God. Because quite sure we know that Jeremiah, one of the genuine and the major prophets of the Old Testament. Then let me keep reading. In the 6th month of the siege, a breach was made in the city walls. Zedekiah and his men fled by night toward the Jordan River, but they were soon captured. He and his leaders were taken before King Nebuchadnezzar at Riblah in Syria, where Zedekiah's sons were slain in his presence, and he, a disloyal vassal, was blinded and carried in chain to Babylon, where he was imprisoned until his death. The walls and houses of Jerusalem were destroyed. His temple was sacked and burned, and the people of Judah, except for the poorest of the land, were deported to Babylon. Thus began the Babylonian exile. Judah lost its status as kingdom and became a Babylonian province. The story of Zedekiah is told in the Old Testament in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 24 and 25, in the 2nd book of Chronicles, chapter 36, and in various passages in the book of Jeremiah. Then I want to read another one. Josiah, king of Judah. This is Josiah, king of Judah. Then Josiah also spelled Josiah. The first Josiah is Josiah, but it is the same person. Then the H, okay. Then the second spelling is Josias. Josiah, also spelled Josias, born c. 648 BCE, died 609, king of Judah, c. in bracket 640 to 609 BCE, who set in motion a reformation that bears his name and that left an indelible mark on Israel's religious traditions, as recorded in 2 Kings chapter 22 to chapter 23, verse 30. Josiah was the grandson of Manasseh, king of Judah, and ascended the throne at age 8 after the assassination of his father Ammon in 641. For a century, ever since Ahaz, Judah had been a vassal of the Assyrian Empire. Imperial policy imposed alien court. Imperial policy imposed alien courts, CULTS, imposed alien court, foreign court on Judah that suppressed or obscured the Israelites' religious identity. After the death of King Ashurbanipal, Ashurbanipal, ASHURBANIPAL. After the death of King Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian Empire fell into chaos. It could no longer assert its authority in Jerusalem. Egypt also was weak, and Judah thus obtained an unusual degree of independence from foreign powers. About 621, Josiah launched a program of national renewal centered on the temple in Jerusalem, a book believed to have contained provisions relating to covenantal traditions of pre-monarchic times, deeply impressed him and gave a decisive turn to his reform. The temple was purged of all foreign cults and dedicated wholly to the worship of Yahweh, and all local sanctuaries were abolished, sacrificed, being concentrated at Jerusalem. In Assyria, Babylonia, which had long been a restive province, led a coalition that sacked Nineveh. The empire was in desperate straits. The Babylonians seemed about to displace it, hoping to keep Mesopotamia divided. Necho II, the Egyptian pharaoh, set out to aid the hard-pressed Assyrians. He landed a force on the territory of the northern kingdom of Israel. King Josiah had hope of a reunification of Judah and Israel, making the latter territory part of his own realm under the aegis of Babylonia, aegis, AEGIS, of Babylonia. Consequently, he challenged the pharaoh to battle, but it is reported that Necho slew him at Megiddo when he saw him, recorded in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 29. Soon thereafter, Assyria was completely eliminated, the Egyptians retreated, and Josiah's son Jehoiakim, whom Necho had placed on the throne of Judah as a vassal, had to submit Babylonia, the new Mesopotamia empire. So, It is about showing us the biblical record of this feudalism. Even the Israelis were colonized in the Old, the feudalism being meted upon them. In the New Testament, they were also under colonization before the arrival, before the beginning of the mission of Jesus Christ. So Israel was under Roman colonization, even as at then. Then it was a Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, who judged Jesus' matter. Even though he declared him innocent, his fellow Jews insisted that he must be crucified based on their, according to their religious arrogance, not actually that Jesus Christ had blasphemed the God of heaven or had actually offended them in any way, but as a result of their religious arrogance, envy, and jealousy for him preaching and the taking over the leadership in righteousness, people began to give him that is unanticipated attention by the public. So the Israelis underwent all these things, and as a result of their own sin. But however, the same Israelis have liberated themselves from all this political colonization. Then why can't we do the same? What are we waiting for? Well, then why should we always blame it on Jesus Christ, blame it on Christianity? No, now we have confirmed that there is a great difference between the real Christianity and the colonial Christianity. It is the colonists adulterating Christianity to politicize it for colonization, not actually that they were preaching the Christianity and they were not Christians themselves, but they use it to merchandise their colonization. And the worst part of it is that when the true Christianity is brought to our people, they reject it because the true Christianity stands against evil of all sorts. That is the only worship system that stands against evil in all ramifications, because it is actually of God, made by God, made in heaven by God, born in Jesus Christ, uttered by Jesus Christ, and for the salvation of humanity, and for character development, and for tranquility and peace in our society. If we actually practice the real Christianity, the real Christianity is centered on love and gentleness. So the program has come to an end, and I remain your serviceable servant, Evangelist Inimakalo. So remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so, Evangelist Inimakalo, so that we'll continue to be a contributor to developing this platform for these wonderful works people will be receiving to promote, so to keep educating our people via social media. Subscribe and recommend this very channel to others. Then regarding Biafra and the Biafra agitation, it is Inima Biafra. Inima Biafra is where you will subscribe for that. But this platform is precisely for Christian education, Christian teaching. Here I want to see people growing in the Christian knowledge very immensely, and to influence their environment with the knowledge of reality, the excellent knowledge based on this platform, Evangelist Inima Treasury of Excellent Knowledge. Until we meet again, remain blessed and bye for now.